guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. I'm so looking forward to today's video because I honestly love watching this video and it was so fun to put together. But today I'm going to be doing some hyper-specific book recommendations. That's right, I asked over on Instagram for some really specific bookish needs that you might have, and today I'm going to be going through 10 of them. I did a combination of including the ones that were the most popular and also just ones that really personally called out to me. That being said though, I still have many requested recommendations. So if you guys like this video, I can for sure do more in the future. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first question was for sure one of the most popular ones asked, and it is recommend me a happy book, and then to kind of tag onto that, recommend me a happy book that is not a book by TJ Klune. I'm assuming because TJ Klune is super popular and perhaps one of the books that immediately comes to mind when you're looking for a happy or distracting or fun book to read. That being said, my recommendation for this is Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. This is a classic. It's hilarious, it's so fun, it's whimsical, and it's just a perfect distracting read that's also a good time from beginning to end. Sometimes you crave just picking up a book for pure entertainment, something that's not too heavy but light and fun and funny, and I just feel like this is a delightful read. This is basically following the eve of the end of the world, and basically one of Lucifer's demons and one of God's angels have unexpectedly become good friends over the years. And so while the armies of good and evil are amassing to basically bring about the end of the world as we know it, our two main characters are looking to find and protect the Antichrist. This book is just delightfully hilarious, full of all the wonderful dialogue you would expect from Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. It's also been adapted into a really fun and funny TV show that Clay and I both watched and really enjoyed. I don't know, I love this book. It's just quirky and weird, and I also love how it kind of pokes fun at a lot of well-known religious allegory. Nonetheless, if you're looking for a fun, happy book that will still completely sweep you away, this is a great option to check out. Next hyper-specific book recommendation was a queer enemies to lover recommendation, and for that I have The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is a first book to a new high fantasy story, and personally I find the strength of the story is actually the sapphic will they, won't they, drawn to each other but they hate each other, they're on opposite sides of a conflict. Romance is my favorite part of this book. This is a story that primarily follows our two main characters. The first is Milani, who is a princess and who has also been imprisoned by her older evil emperor brother. She is essentially kept in a drug haze and far away from her own kingdom to ensure that she doesn't create any more havoc politically for him. And the other main character we follow is actually her maidservant, and her name is Priya, and she herself has dreams of freedom and is also involved in her own political movement as well. Both of these women basically very early on become drawn to one another. The mystery of each other's lives keeps the other coming back. But what I really appreciate about this particular enemies to lover plotline is that it's not like one gives up their point of view or even like their own goals for the other. They truly have this very complicated relationship where both women have their own agenda and their own ideas of what they're going to do for their own future, and they might not intersect in a way that allows them to work with each other. And this conflict is very much at the heart of the story. I also wouldn't say this is like insta love, it's more like insta attraction, and both women are also keeping their own secrets. They're not really revealing their full set of cards, and I think this dramatic and angsty back and forth is just so well written. I wouldn't say I love all of the fantasy plot lines in this, but if you're looking for a very entertaining enemies to lover story that's queer and sapphic, this is a good one to pick up because they really have a complicated endgame, and I'm really not sure where it's all going to wrap up, but the tension and the drama the author is able to create between them is just divine. Next is a fantasy that also has a mystery thriller component, and for that I'm going to recommend The Helm of Midnight by Marina Lostetter. This is such an interesting mix of genres. Obviously, as I mentioned, it is fantasy, high fantasy to be exact, but it also combines elements of horror as well as a murder mystery detective story, and all of those things together just makes it so unique and so gripping. I flew through this book. This is a multi-POV story that also has perspectives that kind of live in different time periods and also kind of exist in their own unique threads, and kind of seeing the storylines slowly come together is very, very cool. Primarily we follow our main character Krona, and she is a regulator. In this world there is magic, but it is very tightly controlled, or as you might guess, regulated. And it's her profession's job to basically monitor the use of magic and also control the creation of different artifacts, just basically how the magic itself manifests. It's very object-based, which makes it very interesting to kind of learn and see about in this world. However, at the beginning of the story, a very dangerous magical item is stolen, and that is the death mask of a very well-known and dangerous serial killer called Charbon. Death masks in this world basically allow individuals to imbue a piece of wood, a mask, with their memories and their skill set. So basically if you put it on, you can become a better healer or dancer or what have you. Obviously with Charbon's death mask, it's incredibly dangerous because the skills he left behind is that of a mass murderer. And now the murders are beginning to haunt the city once again. And we follow Krona as she becomes knee deep in this mystery. It's dark, it's gory, it's scary, it'll get your pulse racing. The magic is so cool and the detective element is so well constructed. I did not guess the ending. It's very satisfying. A really cool fantasy thriller combination. Next up, we have one of the more very specific recommendation requests, and that is a 17th century historical fiction novel that centers political intrigue. And for that, I have The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. This is set in the 1600s in the Netherlands and basically follows a young girl after she marries a very wealthy merchant. And after she moves into his home, he supplies her with a newlywed gift of a miniature of the home that they're living in. As she is residing in her new home, she begins to notice some eerie things that are surrounding her that are also reflected in this new miniature of the home that she has within her home. And she also begins to realize that her husband is keeping secrets from her that involve a larger political context within the city itself. This book is really gripping, full of a lot of historical atmosphere that I just love. I think it really combines the political aspect of the time period as well as the social constraints, while also kind of adding a dash of atmosphere to the mix. Another book that has been adapted into a TV show that actually stars Anna Taylor-Joy, who obviously is very popular. So if you read this, you can definitely check out the TV show as well, but this definitely fits the bill of that recommendation. Next, I got a request for Jewish representation in books that are not related to World War II, and for that I have The Way Back by Gabrielle Savitt. This is a story set in the mid-1800s in a small Eastern European village. This is a story stock full of Jewish folklore and will 100% sweep you away. If you love stories full of lyrical writing and just references to other stories, this is a book for you. This is a dual perspective story following our two main characters who at the beginning of this tale have their own separate interactions with death. This results in both of them going on their own individual journeys through a place called the Far Country. In this particular town, the connection between humans and demons very much exists, and demons kind of live among humans, but they also have their own country called the Far Country. And here, demonic lords and ladies rule. And now our two main characters find themselves in this very dangerous place, must work to find their way back home. Again, this is full of so much Jewish folklore. It's beautifully written, full of so many different stories and references. I was delighted by this book. Also great atmosphere, great winter atmosphere. One of my favorite recent reads for sure. Next up, I got a few requests for books that center pirates, and I had to take this opportunity to talk about The Ship of Magic, or the Live Ship Trader series by Robin Hobb, my favorite fantasy trilogy of all time. Did I just say that? Perhaps. And this is a series that centers ships, pirates, and merchants at the core of it. If you're craving a book that has pirates, this is the perfect book to pick up. I honestly am not generally a huge fan of pirate fantasy, but it is so well done within this book series that I have to just laud it. This, of course, is the second trilogy within Robin Hobb's world. You can technically start here, so if the synopsis really calls out to you, you can pick this up before the Farseer trilogy. This is a huge multi-POV book series. You're following so many different characters. A group of them are all kind of from one singular place where being a merchant is the primary way of life. And here there is a particular magical item or piece of wood called wizard wood, and when it's constructed into ships, they basically allow the ships to come to life and have their own personality. And we follow these live ships and some of the individuals who work upon these ships as they go about their life and business. We also follow a large cast of other characters. Many of them are actually pirates, and you follow the course of their lives throughout this entire trilogy. I'm being vague here, but just the journey you're going to go on with all of these characters is amazing, and a large part of this book is spent at sea or near sea towns or ports. It definitely has pirate vibes throughout this entire series. It's so good. The characters will live in you forever. It'll destroy you. Amazing. Read this book, even if you don't like pirates, because I generally don't, and it's still like my favorite series of all time. So you gotta read it. Next up is my favorite book set in New York City. This was a hard one. I do really enjoy reading books set in New York City, but I decided to go with The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, not only because it's wonderfully written and N.K. Jemisin just basically writes fantasy that I love no matter what she writes, but this book really does feel like a love song or a love letter to New York itself. It's such a cool idea and setup. It is an urban fantasy story that centers around the concept that cities themselves become alive after a certain period of time, and New York itself is on the cusp of being born. But something disrupts this birth, which kind of throws the city itself in mayhem, and there's an evil force trying to destroy it. This results in each of the boroughs kind of being awoken into different individuals throughout the city, and those individuals kind of personify that particular borough or area. And a group of them begin to work together to try to save New York and kind of thwart this evil power. It's full of so many great characters that you follow, and just the concept is fascinating. There's also so much happening within the writing and narrative. So much commentary not only on the city itself, but also just society in general. I loved this book. It was so imaginative, and I also just love this personification of the city itself. It's amazing. I love it so much. Next up, I got a few requests for a book to read when you're feeling burnt out on life. Something that is perhaps emotional, but ultimately uplifting. And also the requests included not a book by Matt Haig. So I've decided to go with A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. This book is so much about second chances and kind of giving yourself a new lease on life, breaking habits, and kind of giving yourself a chance to live again. This basically follows our main character, Ove, and he is a very grumpy man, very much set in his ways. He doesn't like his neighbors, he's very involved in the neighborhood association, and you better not park your bike on his lawn because he will write you a very mean and nasty letter. So you can imagine Ove's distress when new neighbors move in from him across the street, and they're loud and boisterous, and they have kids, and they're constantly asking him for help for stuff. It's absolutely turned Ove's life upside down, but it also begins to change it in ways that he would not expect. This is a story about Ove, a man who thought he was set in his ways, who thought he was ready to move on from life, especially after the passing of his wife, but instead decided to reopen his heart to companionship and friendship and love, and it's truly beautiful. I cried a lot reading this book, and I would definitely say trigger warning for suicide, but it is also just such an inspiring read. And also a great book to remind you that it's never too late to make new connections, it's never too late to try a new hobby, it's never too late to change yourself, you know? And I just feel like A Man Called Ove is a perfect book to pick up if you're feeling a little burnt out, because Ove definitely feels that way as well. And you just see his metamorphosis, and it's stunning and it's beautiful, and we love it. Next up is a YA or an adult book that has the whimsy of middle grade. And guess what? I have one for each genre here. The first is A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabos. This is a YA fantasy story that has some of the most imaginative and whimsical and bizarre writing I've encountered in a long time. One of my favorite YA fantasy series. It's also just so imaginative. It really combines a lot of different references to kind of create this overall tale. This follows our main character Ophelia, who can slip through mirrors and also touch objects and see their entire past and history. At the beginning of this book, she has an arranged marriage, and she basically travels from her floating spire in the sky to her new husband's floating spire in the sky to meet him. His spire is very cold and very desolate, and the magic there centers around illusions. She quickly learns that the political escapades aren't just vapid, but they're also dangerous, and her husband himself is also very, very cold. I love this series. It's very unique, one of the most unique YA books I've read. I also just feel like it has a lot of the whimsy and imagery that is often found in middle grade, but obviously in a more YA setting. In the same vein, I also have Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. I feel like this shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Again, this is an adult high fantasy story, and it is very dark and very intense, but it does also have some of the most unique and lyrical writing I have found in adult fantasy. Plus, just the imagination of the author to construct this world absolutely blew me away. That being said, this follows our main character Senlin, who in the beginning of book 1 travels to this place called the Tower of Babel, which is this huge magical tower where thousands of people live. There are a lot of different floors and a lot of different political powers at play. Unfortunately, at the beginning of book 1, him and his new wife are separated. The rest of the series, we follow Senlin as he traverses this tower in hopes of finding her. It's so good. I love it. I'm on the last book myself. But if you love middle grade whimsy and want to read an adult book or a YA book that kind of have that sort of vibe, I really recommend checking these out. And the very last hyper-specific recommendation is recommend a book that reminds you of BTS. This one stumped me for a bit. I wasn't sure which direction I wanted to go with this, but ultimately I settled on the concept of found family. When I think of BTS, that's definitely something that immediately comes to mind. I'm a big BTS OT7 fan, but these two books I feel like have some of the best found family components in them, which is why I'm going to be recommending them for BTS. The first is Raybear by Jordan Afueko. This is a really unique and imaginative YA fantasy duology inspired by African folklore. There's lots of great character work that I personally love so much, but truly at the heart of this series, I feel like there's such a wonderful found family component, picking the people in your life that love you and you love them, and kind of creating your own family for yourself. It's just inspiring and delightful. The fantasy plotline is also incredibly engaging, one of the best YA fantasy series I've read in a while, and also one of the best found family centered stories I've also read in a while. And then I also feel like I have to mention books by TJ Klune. Both of the books I read by him center found family at the heart of the book. Very heartwarming, very distracting. Kind of like the vibes I feel when I am watching a Run BTS episode. But nonetheless, these are adult fantasy stories that each have their own flavor, basically about acceptance, finding a new family for yourself, love, and making friends. This is Under the Whispering Door, which also has to do with grief and loss. And the other is The House on the Cerulean Sea, which has a lot more to do with being different, second chance love, and children. I personally really enjoy TJ Klune's writing, and I do feel like he's really honed in on that found family element, which to me again just reminds me of BTS personally. Alrighty guys, those are my hyper-specific book recommendations. Let me know down below if you like this video. Again, I'll for sure do more in the future if this is something you guys like to watch, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!